Welcome everyone. We're just letting you all into the room, making sure everyone's come in nice and quickly. And we're just going to give it a minute and then we're going to kick off. Thank you to everyone who's joined. Again, we're just waiting for everyone to join in, make sure that everyone's got plenty of time to settle in for the next hour and a half. And then we'll kick off in a minute. Okay, guys, that's given us plenty of time to get everyone into the room and welcome you all through. So hello, everyone. Good evening. I hope you've enjoyed the lovely sunshine that we have had outside today. So welcome. I hope you are going to enjoy tonight's interesting series of talks. It's called Upskill Yourself. It's going to be a series of 3 individual talks from our teams across ZSL. So tonight is really an opportunity for you to sit back, relax, and take some time for yourself by gaining some new skills and some CPD hours because they're hard to get hold of. You're going to hear from 3 incredible women here at ZSL, including ZSL's mammal curator, Sarah Forsyth, public engagement with science manager Lucy Brown, and science events and communications manager Harriet Makara. Now, before we get into the 3 fascinating talks this evening, we've just got a few house rules and apologies. If you've been to any of these before, you'll know what I'm going to say, basically. So the first is at the bottom of the screen is a bit of a chat function box. If you have any issues or any difficulty, be able to come and sort out any issues that you have. Also at the bottom of the screen is a very small little Q&A function box. Do put your questions in there as we're going through because you will have the opportunity to speak with Sarah, Lucy and Harriet. The format for tonight's talk will be that we'll have the 3 talks from Sarah, Harriet and Lucy, and then you'll have the opportunity to ask them direct questions at the end. So please don't be scared to put your questions in the chat throughout the talks. That's what we want. So that at the end, we have lots of different bits that we can go through with you. So if any questions you might have is important. Right. Now we've covered all the bases, I would like to introduce you to Sarah Forsyth. Sarah is our curator of mammals here at ZSL, and Sarah has an extensive history within the zoological sector, including being the curator at Colchester Zoo. We're very lucky to now have her here with us at ZSL, and she's going to take you on a journey of her career. She's going to share some top tips and tricks that she's learned along the way that can hopefully inform and inspire you throughout your own career paths. It's not always one size fits all. There's always a bit of flex. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Right, let me go about sharing my screen. Okay, does that look okay?
Yep, all good.
Yeah, all good. Brilliant. Thanks very much. Okay, so as Lindsay said, I am Sarah and I'm the curator of mammals at ZSL. So lovely to sort of meet you all. What I'm going to do today is give you first of all a bit of an introduction to what my actual role is. Curator of mammals can sometimes be a bit of a strange title, so get a bit of an idea of what my job is. Then let you know how I actually got to this position and all the different career paths I took to get to where I am now. And also just to give you a bit of an idea of tips and tricks that I've learned along the way and things that I kind of discovered during my career path, but also a lot of my career was also hiring staff in different roles that I've done. So kind of giving you some idea of what I kind of expected to see and what sort of made people stand out. Okay, so what is my role? So I guess the main thing is species management. So I do sit across London and Whipsnade zoos, and it's basically deciding what species we have at both zoos and why we have them and what situation they're going to be in. I work really, really closely with other zoos across the whole of Europe and also EEP coordinators, who are those that manage the EAZA, which is the European Association of Zoos and Aquaria, the ex situ breeding programs. And a lot of that is actually where we get our animals from. They decide which animals should breed with which animals. Want to make sure we have as many of our species in a good breeding situation as possible. We want to be able to contribute to populations across zoos. And then, of course, sometimes if we're really successful and we're breeding really, really well, we want to be able to place our surplus animals and follow breeding and transfer recommendations. So there's a lot of communicating with a lot of people throughout the whole of Europe. And also with species choice, unfortunately, it's not just about me deciding what I would like in our zoos and picking my favourites. I really want to make sure that we're linking the species we have in our zoos with the conservation and research work we do. And of course, I do also get the opportunity sometimes to attend the sites of in situ conservation projects that we're involved in. A big part of my job is supporting animal teams at London and Whipsnade in the husbandry, welfare and management of the animals in our zoos. And that could be anything from helping them with just breeding management or design of enclosures or mixing of new species or just introducing new individuals. And then a big part of it is also contributing to the wider zoo community. So it's not just about the work I do at ZSL, but I sit on a number of committees throughout zoo organisations such as BIAZA and EAZA, attending a lot of conferences where obviously there's a lot of social networking. I'm also a zoo inspector and a EAZA screener. So I go to other zoos and give them advice and inspect them to the standards for EAZA, and also help coordinators and these organisations in contributing to regional collection plans, which is a big part of where our species planning comes from. So to give you an idea of what I've been up to maybe over the last 6 months or so, of course, my job is different every single day. So this is giving you a snapshot. So let's see. A little while ago, we decided we were going to mix zebra and ostrich. So I was stood out in the absolute pouring rain, seeing if we get these two species to work to live together. And actually, it's going really, really well. So that's great. A short time before that, I was actually in Ethiopia, and I was attending a global cheetah summit with about 150 people who were all talking about how we can make sure we save cheetah from extinction. Bit of time before that, I was actually at the House of Commons joining an event there and met the Speaker of the House. So yeah, a bit of a posh evening there. Before that, it was mixing our lovely pygmy hippos at London. We brought in a new female a little while ago, and we're hoping they'll breed. So it was helping the keepers with that introduction. Then before that, I was actually in Helsinki at the EAZA annual conference with a load of colleagues there. And that was a week's worth of talking about species management in our zoos across Europe. Then there was a gorilla GA at London, checking on our male there and making sure he was okay. And then I was in Romania before that doing a zoo inspection. So that just gives you a kind of a real idea of the massive range of work that I do in my role. And of course, I have just focused on the really, really good parts, but working in zoos is not always the best job in the world. It isn't just simply saving species from extinction or just spending time with amazing animals. And I don't just get to head to exotic countries to work in the field and attend meetings, although my pictures maybe have given you that impression. It is a lot of just sitting in the front of a computer. It is a lot of communicating, replying to emails, and of course it also talking about and putting together strategic plans for the species that we have in our zoos. The difficult bits are making some challenging decisions around species. Maybe we've decided that we're not going to keep a species in our zoo anymore for various reasons. And it's having to work with the people that have made connections with them and look after them, and let them know that that decision has been made, which can be sometimes quite hard, or even just making a decision on an individual animal if it's a health-based, or it's it's leaving the collection or going somewhere else. So sometimes it can be quite tough. And of course, there's so many different stakeholders that need to be involved, and that's from the keepers to the vets to our amazing EAC team who look after the welfare and the training of our animals and also nutrition, but it's also thinking about managers, and then our visitors obviously play a big, hugely important to what's going on in our zoos. And then also it's also dealing with other zoos. And as I mentioned, things like people like EEP coordinators as well. So I feel like I'm always having to worry about what everybody's input is and then make the right decision. So that can be quite tense, quite challenging, and quite stressful at times. And of course, even at my level, after all these years of working in zoos, it's still long hours. It's still working weekends and bank holidays. So it's not a simple 9 till 5 job. And this is an example of what I spend a lot of my time on. This is our species planning tool for ZSL. And it's a lot of just inputting, talking about and justifying why we have the species, and sitting in front of a computer. So it's not quite as exotic as I initially made it out to be. But how did I get here? And where did I start my journey? So I'm one of the lucky people that even as a child, when visiting zoos locally, and Whipsnade was actually one of my local zoos as a kid, I always knew that this is what I wanted to do. I remember looking at the zookeepers and going, that's what I want to be one day. This is where I want to be. So I was very lucky that I knew that I wanted to do that. But of course, particularly all of those years ago, it wasn't an easy job to get into. And so trying to figure out how to do that was quite challenging. What I did do was make sure that every time I had an opportunity or had to do some work experience at school, college, whatever else, it was always connected to an animal related facility, so I could start gaining that experience. I did do A-levels, and I had grand ideas of biology and marine biology and all these different things. But again, I really knew that I wanted to do hands-on work, particularly in a zoo environment. So after A-levels, I looked for an animal-related course. Now, again, all those years ago, it was very, very challenging, and there weren't many available. Now there's so many land-based colleges that are offering so many different courses. There's much choice, but there wasn't at that time. But I did actually found a college in Northamptonshire, which wasn't too far from home at the time, and I actually signed up and studied a National Diploma in Animal Care. Now, the course provided a huge amount of practical experience, which was great. So you really be able to get hands-on with the animals that they had at the unit there. And that really helped me gain a lot of practical experience, which became essential later on in my zookeeping career. But also one of the things that they required is that as a student, you did a 12-week work placement, and it had to be obviously in an animal facility. So I rather sneakily applied for a seasonal position at Woburn Safari Park. You weren't really supposed to get paid for your work experience. It was supposed to be an unpaid position, but I saw the position in the paper and I applied for it, and got an interview, and then said, oh, by the way, I can only do weekends until I finish college for the summer, and then I can work all summer and then work weekends for you. And I was really, really lucky because actually they were happy to do that and allow me to do that. The college were a little bit unsure whether that was an appropriate thing, but they did let me do it, and I got away with it. So again, I will talk a bit more about it later, but sometimes pushing boundaries is not a bad thing. It can get you where you need to go. Now, of course, I wanted to work with lions, and I got offered a job working with rainbow lorikeets. And again, another lesson learned, you're not always going to get exactly what you want. But I have to say, even to this day, and I am a mammal curator now, I do have a really, really soft spot for rainbow lorikeets. I literally worked whatever they would allow me to. So weekends, every holiday I had, and every day off I had from college. And it was a lot of work because I also had a part-time job in a shop. It was college, I was traveling. But literally, I knew this was the job I wanted to do. And I was, so chuffed that I was given this opportunity as a seasonal keeper that I just did whatever I could possibly do and worked every hour they could possibly give me. And then it paid off because after the completion of my course, I was actually given a position as a deputy team leader at Woburn. I'm really lucky to go straight from college into a permanent full-time position. 3 years later, I was actually promoted to team leader. And during that time, the whole time I'd worked at Woburn, I worked on lots of different sections and kept moving around and kept gaining different experience with different species. And I was actually at Woburn for 8 years, and I loved every minute of it. I learned a huge amount, but I was quite very career-minded. I really wanted to progress in my career. And I knew that after 8 years at Woburn, there wasn't anything else that I couldn't move up. I was stuck. So I needed to look elsewhere. So I began applying for other jobs and said about being ambitious. And that was definitely the right thing. And I applied for so many positions in so many different zoos. And I got knocked back so many times. I went for position after position and didn't get them. And then I started looking at things that maybe weren't quite what I was wanting. And a position, weirdly enough, came up at the college I studied at as the Animal Welfare Centre manager. Now, I thought to myself, it's not really what I want to do. I want to work in a zoo, but it looked like it could be quite interesting and quite challenging. So I went along to the interview. And actually, as soon as I got there, I knew that this was going to be a great role for me. It offered a whole host of experience and challenges that I would have never had in the zoo. And I think had I not taken that position, I would have not ended up where I am today, because it was things like budget training, commercial experience, really engaging with peoples. I did mentoring of other managers. I was there, a whole host of training courses like Excel and Word. And it was an actually incredible opportunity. But of course, it was really stepping out from what I originally wanted to do. I did make the most of the role, but after 2.5 years, I knew I really wanted to get back into the world of zoos. So I started applying for jobs again. And again, because of all the experience I'd had at Moulton College and the opportunities they'd offered me, I was lucky enough to get a curator position at Colchester Zoo. I was at Colchester Zoo for 14 years in the end, and actually ended up just before I left, or a while before I left, I became the director of living collections and randomly health and safety, which again is something I challenged myself. I pushed myself out of my comfort zone and learned a whole new load of skills by getting involved in the health and safety aspect of things. But again, after 14 years, I thought I wanted a change and I wanted a bit more progression. So I then went on to head of zoo operations at the Zoological Society of East Anglia. And I was there for a while, but didn't quite work out what I wanted to be. It wasn't quite the job I was looking for. And that is how I ended up as curator of mammals at ZSL. So I have been back and forth and left and right, and now I've ended up in this amazing position here at ZSL. But of course, there are so many different roles in zoos, and it's not just about being a zookeeper. Again, we'll talk a bit more later, but getting your foot in the door is really important. And I think sometimes people forget the diverse different roles that you find in zoos, and particularly with ZSL, because we've got the Institute of Zoology as well, and so many amazing departments. ZSL in particular is very unique. That there are so many more opportunities within this industry, this zoo, or this organization. But in other zoos, there are lots of roles as well. And it is seasonal positions, sometimes even just maternity cover or part-time roles should all be considered. Animal keepers, obviously the obvious one, but we've got zoo educators. We have presenters that, again, are really get involved with dealing with the public, but also learn so much about the animals that they're presenting about. We've got animal experiences coordinators, so working with visitors and the keepers and interacting with animals there. Obviously, research coordinators, really, really important, and we learn so much from what they do. Even just a volunteer manager role, the volunteers are so important, and actually getting involved in managing the volunteers in our zoos is a hugely important part, and again gives you so many different experiences and skills. There's animal welfare officer, behavior management officer, and nutritionist. And this is just a few, but just to give you an idea, remember there are so many more roles than just an animal keeper position in a zoo. So for me, as somebody is employing staff in numerous positions, first impressions are really, really, really important. And it probably sounds a little bit silly, but actually making sure your CV is absolutely perfect is really, really important, because that's the first thing as an employer we see when we put out an advert and start getting applications in. So the CV needs to be really highlight relevant experience for the position and adapt your CV to the role. And I don't mean lie and make stuff up, obviously, but think about what the position is, what actually criteria are they asking for, and then make sure that on your CV you're really going into depth more about that specific for that role, and maybe less so if it was a different role. So there's ways of making your CV stand out and be more noticeable. A detailed but to the point covering letter is also really, really important. Embellish in areas that you can't do on your CV that are relevant to the role, and expand in subjects that maybe you couldn't really explain so much in your CV to really, again, stand out against others. And I think being prepared for the interview is obviously really important as well. Do your research on the institution that you're applying for a job for, because you're going to be asked questions about it, and showing that you've done the background and you've done the prep work and you know what the institution does, it really stands out in an interview. And just because we're a zoo or a conservation or a science organisation doesn't mean we don't want you to dress up and be smart. Always first impression so important. When somebody turns out really smart for an interview, it gives an instant good first impression. So always consider that, no matter where the job is. It is really important to stand out from the crowd. As I said, in the days that I was looking for, it was quite difficult to find courses that were related to animal care. But now there are so many out there, and there are so many opportunities to go and do work abroad and get involved in different projects. But because so many people have got access to it, it's very difficult standing out from the crowd when you're applying for a job. So what do? Well, just bear in mind, it's not about just having practical work with animals or having zoo experience. Think a bit bigger than that. How can you really stand out from just everybody else that's applying? There are so many different things that you can do. Open water scuba diver, a chainsaw license, four-wheel drive training, mammal trapping, and bird ringing. Any short course related, there are things like first aid for animals out there. There's reptile and raptor care courses that you can get involved in. Even if they're not particularly the species that you're interested in, it's all good round experience. And just remember that engaging our visitors is really, really, really important. So having great customer service experience and showing that you've worked in different shops, you've been able to manage different complaints, you've been able to really engage with people, whether it's selling them stuff or it's just talking to them about what's going on in the job you're doing. That's essential in this job. So really focus on that. Don't just think about the animal side. Supervisory skills, again, great in any position you do, they're always transferable. So really something to focus on if you do have any of that experience. And again, that always makes somebody stand out, no matter what the job is they've been doing. Budget management, not a particularly fun one, but if you have got it and you have been working with it, again, it is a really good experience to have. Presentation skills are essential, even if it's just talking to people. But of course, now there are so many opportunities where we present, whether that's to our colleagues, whether it's externally to other people, or other zoos and conferences and meetings. So really, really good. If you've got those skills, talk about them, let them know you've got them. Computer skills, of course, are hugely important nowadays. So any courses you can do to show that you've got experience working with these different softwares really does, make a difference. I think making the most of social networking is also really important. LinkedIn is a hugely great platform, and it's a really interesting way of making connections with the industry. And I think also it's an opportunity for you to showcase what you're already doing. I quite often have people contact me directly, and whether it is just asking for advice on their career development, whether it's asking what I think they should do next, or just giving them some support. And I don't have to know these people, but if they connect and they want information, I'm always happy to share. So that's why I'd say don't be frightened to reach out to individuals directly, because most of us in the industry want to help and want to guide and want to give other people as much opportunity as we did. So I think that's what these social platforms are for. Don't be frightened to reach out. If you can, join organizations such as ABWAC, that's just one example, but what they do is give you a great opportunity. You don't have to be working in a zoo to be a member, but they're great training opportunities. I mean, you guys are all doing it, you're fellows for ZSL, so you've already got your foot in the door. But the more socializing you can do with people working in the industry, the more chance you've got of, one, understanding what's out there and what you need to do to get to where you want to be, but also gives you an idea of all the different opportunities that you could have. So yeah, volunteering, work placements, apprenticeships all provide an opportunity to get your foot in the door. If you have decided it's definitely a zoo that you want to work in and it's within the animal management, veterinary, welfare department. I think understanding the role of a responsible zoo is really, really important. And that would be a big tip of mine to say, you know, do your research, not just about the institution, but what is the role of a responsible zoo? You know, do you understand about species planning? Touched on it earlier. We have a whole system about, you know, that helps us decide on the species that we're going to choose for our zoos at ZSL. But what does it mean? How does it work? You know, what is the BIAZA, the British and Irish Association of Zoos and Aquaria? What does that mean? What is that organisation? And what does it mean to be a member? IAZA is where we do most of our species planning, because they're the ones that do the regional collection plans. So they really help us in choosing our species. And it certainly, for me, if I was interviewing somebody wanting to work in a zoological role, I'd ask them what they know about IAZA and BIAZA. So do your research. Both websites are accessible to people who aren't members and give you information about them. What's an EEP? Again, those are the people that tell us what animals we can have, when we can have them, and when they can breed. So understanding how an EEP works, and how we as zoos have to work with them, again, give you an edge over others during an interview that if they haven't done that research and don't know about it. Tags, they're a taxon advisory group. Again, I'm not going to tell you what they are, go out there and find out. But again, the huge part of species planning and species choice in our zoos. What is in situ and ex situ conservation? Understand the difference, understand the importance of both. And then a big thing zoos really nowadays is the challenges around responsible population management. So do your research around that, find out what it means. You know, how do we manage in our zoos? How do we cope when we run out of space? What do we do with the animals that we do breed? Where do they go? And there's so much information out there, and knowing about it will give you an edge when it comes to interviews. And then these are just some additional tips and tricks that I'd like to leave you with to help you along your way. You do sometimes have to make a brave and bold decision to get to where you want to go. And that might be moving far away from home, leaving friends and family behind, depends how important the job is to you. It might be taking a sidestep. Like I said, I went from working in a zoo that I loved to working in a college, which is not what I wanted to do. But I genuinely believe if I hadn't made that sidestep and slightly stepped outside of my chosen career path, I wouldn't be where I am today. So don't be frightened to do it. Don't just limit yourself to sticking to specific roles or species. You know, I do definitely have a love for rainbow lorikeets now, although very much at the beginning, it was mammals, it was the big animals that I wanted to work with. You very much may be surprised by how much you enjoy the unexpected and what you didn't plan on doing. And once you've got your foot in the door, you never know what's going to happen next. And there you go. Once you've got your foot in the door, you can really show them what you can do, and then that'll open up other opportunities for you. So don't hold yourself back by saying no to something that isn't quite perfect when you were offered it. People say to me, should I apply for this job, Sarah? I'm not sure if I want it. You know, do I really go through the process? What I would always say is apply for roles, even if you're not sure you want them. It's always good to go for an interview. It's great to get interview experience. And you just never know. You might turn up and think very differently once you're there, and once you really get an idea of what the job is, and completely think, yes, this is the job for me. And it is also a great way of meeting people in the industry and understanding the different roles that are out there. So apply for those jobs, get the interviews, and go along, even if you're not sure. And then I'd say, no matter what your role is now or in the future, always be challenged. You know, don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone. Whatever you do, the more experience you get, it increases your skill set. Even if it's doing something you're really uncomfortable with or really weren't sure about, if there's an opportunity to learn a new skill or do something slightly different, then I would always say, take that challenge and do it, because everything that you can add to your skill set will give you an edge over others. And that is me.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We actually do have quite a few students from Malton College, so hopefully one of them is on the call tonight, which always makes me happy when I see it's like a full circle where there's lots of interconnections.
Great.
I think it's really important to understand that everyone's career path will be different, and it's really good to see the sort of the different ways that you can do it. It's not just a straight line. I said this before on the careers pathway events. You know, there will be ebbs and flows, and it's important to not get disheartened. You will get there. It just may not be in the line that you thought it was going to be.
Absolutely.
So, you know, there's always give it time. Also, Sarah, you mentioned doing short animal courses. For those of you who are attending the Fellows Conference at the next weekend, we actually do have a taste of exotic first aid. If you feel like it, I think one of them is a bird, so we can pretend it's your rainbow parakeet. So yeah, you can book on that if you're coming. And we also have one where Sarah herself will be in person doing master planning and curatorial. So if you did want to understand a bit more about how we do things at ZSL, then I would recommend coming and booking for one of those sessions, because you'll get all the ins and outs there. We did have a question that came through, Sarah, when you were on the call. In fact, we've had two. So the first one is, does any volunteering or experience stand out for you more than any other?
I think a combination of somewhere, and it sounds silly, but you know, just volunteering in a zoo is great, and obviously it's great experience. It obviously adds to your connection if that's the job you want to do. But also I think, because again, talking about customer services and visitor engagement, even volunteering in like a pet shop or, you know, a farm park, anywhere really, where you maybe get multiple skills, whether it's engaging with visitors, doing some presenting, and getting that hands-on animal experience as well. I think any volunteering opportunity that gives you multiple, you know, chances of experience and skills, it stands out. And of course, the more you do, but sometimes, you know, maybe not just being the really obvious zoo ones every single time, maybe do a few different types, or even kind of doing some with some wildlife organizations where it's going out in the field and doing some, you know, I don't know, maybe like monitoring bats in the middle of the night, knowing that you're going to stay up all night, and showing what your dedication is, again, might stand out. But I think the more you do, and how different it is, you know, really does stand out.
For any of you who are interested in that kind of staying up overnight, we do have eels monitoring. So you have to go wading in the Thames, monitoring and counting eels, which I highly recommend. We will send you information. And we're going to do our hedgehog surveys this year. So that is going around the zoo in the pitch black, which you can get involved with. We have another question about volunteering, which would be, would volunteering at ZSL be a good way of getting your foot in the door to meet people in the industry? And does it also help with your CV and skill set, even though it's unpaid? I think you kind of summed that up last time.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Being unpaid is well, you know, doing something unpaid just shows how dedicated you are. So it can never be a bad thing. You're never going to be, you know, considered that it's less of a position because it's unpaid, and definitely gets your foot in it. That's one of the ways you can show what you're made of, you know, volunteer, you know, interact with the keepers, get to know everybody, get to know the staff on site, learn about everything that's going on, and also it gives you the chance to be the first to hear about opportunities as well. So yeah, definitely volunteering is a great foot in the door.
I agree. I must admit, I did my volunteering here at ZSL, and it was just, you see the zoo in a completely different way, and it gives you some really great insight, and it makes you realize if you do want to do it, because if you're willing to put that amount of time and effort and not get paid, then you know it's probably the right career path for you.
Yeah, it's a good way of testing it before you definitely, because it goes two ways, you know. It's not just about, you know, the zoo making sure you're right for the zoo, but is the zoo right for you? And it isn't right for everybody.
It's a bit of a try before you buy.
Yes.
Final question that we have for you, Sarah, and it's one that I'm quite interested to know. What is the oddest skill that you have had to learn whilst being in your career? What is the thing that you never thought you would have to learn?
Wow. I mean, there probably is quite a few. There's a really boring one, which is things like budget management, which I guess, particularly when you're starting out, you would be like, why would I need to know that if I want to work in a zoo? But actually, it can be really, really useful and really important. Certainly the oddest one is having to learn how to manage rhino sperm before it's artificially inseminated into the female.
Niche.
Absolutely niche. Never knew I would need to know that, but it was really important for a period of time because we were doing a lot of artificial insemination at Colchester Zoo. We were the first to be successful, but if you don't handle it right and you don't look after it properly before the time comes, then yeah, you can ruin the whole process. So who knew?
Who knew that you'd have to learn that as a skill in life? Amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that. We are now going to move on to our second talk for the evening. So that is with Harriet Makara. Harriet is our Science Communication and Events Manager here at the Institute of Zoology at London Zoo, literally in the office next door to me. For those of you who haven't heard of IOZ or what IOZ means, it's the Institute of Zoology. It's our research division of ZSL. It addresses global challenges in the fields of conservation science. Bit wordy. If you've ever attended any of our scientific conferences or our fantastic schedule of scientific talks, it will be Harriet who is behind the scenes making sure that everything runs smoothly. And I'm delighted that we can actually bring her in front of the camera today to speak with you. So Harriet has previously worked in science communication for universities and in the charity sector. She's going to speak to you about the varied and creative ways that we can communicate science to different audiences and why that's important, no matter which career path you choose, particularly in this ever-changing world. So over to you, Harriet.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. I will just share my screen and try and chat at the same time.
It's a skill you didn't know that you needed.
I know, it's hard to be on the other side when you're so used to doing it behind the scenes for other people. But no, I'm really pleased to be able to speak to you all today. And also just a huge thank you to Lindsay for asking me to talk, and also for organising this, because you know, she's put in a lot of work. Does that look okay from your end, Lynn?
Yes, I can see everything.
Wonderful, thank you. Great. So I'm going to talk about my role at ZSL, working in the Institute of Zoology. So I'm the Science Communications and Events Manager, as Lindsay said. And a really crucial part of working in science is sharing your work with other people. So this might be communicating your research to an academic audience, so writing academic papers, presenting posters or giving talks. But it might also be communicating to people outside of your area of expertise as well. And every time that you talk about your work, you make it more accessible and more inclusive. And it's also beneficial for you. You can be introduced to new points of view. You might learn new things about your work and see it in a different light from questions that people may ask you. So knowing how to effectively communicate what you do, whether that is science and conservation or any other sector that you might be in, comes with a certain skill set, but it's definitely one that you can learn, and you can kind of develop that with practice. So we're going to talk a bit about that. Okay, so I'll start with a bit about me. So I grew up in Sheffield. The accent has completely evaded me. I went to Newcastle University and I studied zoology as an undergraduate degree. After I graduated, I continued to work at Newcastle University. So I worked in science and engineering outreach there. So that was kind of a mix between student recruitment and public engagement, excuse me, working to encourage students into science and engineering degrees and careers. Following that, I did an internship, with the Royal Society of Biology in science communication. And that led me to a job at the Royal Society of Biology. So I worked in membership and then events and communications for the RSB. And then I moved to my current role at ZSL as Science Communications and Events Manager. I would also say, and I'm very grateful to Sarah and Lindsay for highlighting this in the Q&A just then, but I would say that my career looks a lot more straightforward in this slide perhaps than it was. It doesn't encompass everything. It was a lot more stop-start than it looks. I realised that this slide makes it look like I did school, uni, internship, job, another job, but it wasn't always like that. I took time off to go travelling and to care for family members. I worked in a pub for a while. I did supply teaching. I volunteered on a farm for a little bit as well. So there was a lot of kind of ins and outs. So it was a little bit more squiggly than it looks. So obviously you are all lovely fellows. So you are probably aware of ZSL's Institute of Zoology, and Lindsay did introduce it a little bit earlier, but quick run through. So an important part of doing conservation is the research to gain a better understanding of the problems that exist and how they can be solved. So the scientists who work in the Institute of Zoology carry out that research, and their research is centered around these 5 conservation challenges. And that's kind of where I come in. So why does my job exist? I will also say that there were probably going to be some parallels between mine and Lucy's role, and she might touch on this as well later. So might be some similar things here. But thinking about why my job, this. You may have all seen or heard of this statistic before. So current extinction rates are about 1,000 times higher than what we can expect by looking at the fossil record. And this 69% statistic is from the most recent Living Planet report that was published in 2022 by ZSL and the WWF, which showed that we've lost nearly 70% of all animal populations. And this is looking at just vertebrates as well. It's potentially worse if we include invertebrates in that. But we are obviously hoping to shift that curve. And one way we can do that is by making sure that we are science-led and ensuring that we have that scientific evidence at the heart of what we do. So whether that be communicating to the public or communicating to governments and policymakers as well. And that's kind of where we come in. So a bit of background, what is science communication? Obviously, I have it in my job title, so you would hope that I know something about it. So the clue is in the title. It's the practice of communicating science-related topics to non-experts. So it's enabling people to create connection between science and society. So I like to kind of split science communication into 2 sections, one of which is outreach. So it's kind of generally to a non-science audience, encouraging the public to engage with and increase their understanding of science. And the second is in reach. So that might be a scientific community to another scientific community. So that can be things like academic publications and scientific papers, more kind of sciencey audience. So why is science communication important? I obviously think it is incredibly important because it's my job. But there is kind of wider reasons as to why science communication is so important as well. And hopefully I can convince you of that in the next few minutes. So it allows us to enable informed decision making. So it gives people access to facts and information and allows them to use that to act objectively. So that might be from the public or all the way through again to kind of governments, policymakers. But they have all the information at hand to enable them to make those decisions. It can influence people's behaviour, so allowing people to apply knowledge that they've learnt to their day-to-day lives. So an example of this might be reducing your plastic consumption based on an article that you read, which used scientific research to convince you to change your behaviour. It increases trust in science. And I think this kind of shows a very human side to science and to research, rather than science always being something that's kind of distant and from a really anonymous source. If you do your science communication right, it can increase people's trust in science, and they're more likely to share and talk about sources of information that they trust. And it also kind of, along with that, helps reduce spread of misinformation as well, which obviously is incredibly important. It can generate public support, which can lead to collaboration and political support as well, but also, which I think is a really important point to highlight, it can increase funding as well. So if you are talking about your science in a really brilliant way, using really great science communication tools, more people are perhaps likely to fund your science as well, which is only a good thing. And finally, it can inspire the next generation. So inspiring people to pursue a career in science and to continue that research can only make the sector and the careers in general more inclusive, more accessible, and more diverse as well. So thinking about where we find science communication, it's all over the place, in short. But a few examples. So documentaries, I'm sure that you are all David Attenborough fans. That is definitely counts as science communication. Books as well, podcasts, it can be in print media. So again, newspaper articles, journals, magazines, anywhere that kind of mentions any form of science can count as science communication. Events and festivals and public lectures, and finally social media. So the 3 points that I've highlighted there in bold are what I do as part of my role. So the events that Lindsay mentioned earlier, all the science and conservation events that we run at ZSL, those are a form of science communication, and we kind of use our current science research in the Institute to share that with a wider audience, and you included. We also have our Wild Science podcast and all of the ZSL Science social medias, which I will plug again later. Okay, I think this image is a really good depiction of the kind of cycle of creating science communication output. So this is a kind of good way to think about how we develop that output. So starting at the top with the goals and audience up here at the top, but always keeping the message as the sort of central focus. So starting with audience, then thinking about kind of who interacts or listens to what you create. So that might be researchers, it might be your friends and family, it could be people attending an event, or it could be policymakers, decision makers. But whatever your audience is, knowing that who they are can help you achieve your goal, and it also can dictate what your communication channel is. So if you want your communication to have an impact, you need to make people care about it, and they need to care about what you're sharing, and you need to know what's important to your audience. So I think knowing your audience is a really great place to start when thinking about how you want to share any kind of science messaging. So it's kind of, as this image shows, it's a constant cycle of evaluation and reflection and adjusting what you're doing. So if you pick your audience, for example, maybe it's 16-year-olds that you want to learn more about the science that we do in the Institute of Zoology, where might that audience be found? Maybe they're found on social media. So that might dictate your communication channel in that way. And your goal might be to get them engaged with your work. You want them to click through to links, you want them to follow you. So kind of always keeping that in mind, which can constantly be evaluated and changed if needed. So when it comes to communications, I always like to think of the 5 C's, which I think is a really good way to make sure that your communication output is effective. So making sure that it is concise but complete, making it clear, making it sure it is correct and you're giving factual information, that it is coherent and understandable, and that it's credible as well. So it comes from a trustworthy source, and that kind of can come with building trust as well as citing sources and making sure that the information you're providing is from somewhere trustworthy. So that leads me on to talking about science communication and social media. So a large part of what we do at ZSL, and my role in particular, is look after some of our social media channels. Hopefully you are all aware of the social media that we run at ZSL. So we have all the forms of social media, and it is such a widely used platform. There are 4.8 billion users globally, which is about 60% of the population, and that equates to about 84% of the UK population. So on Twitter alone, there's about 450 million monthly active users. So it's huge. And I think the point I kind of try to make here is that it's not going anywhere. 25 to 30-year-olds are the most popular age group for using social media. about just over half of tweets sent out are from people born from 1997 to the mid 2010s. So that's kind of, it just kind of shows that it's not going anywhere. People are still very much using it actively, and that kind of therefore makes it a very important platform and channel to put our communications and share our science. Okay. So a few kind of key points when thinking about social media specifically. This is similar to the 5 C's that I mentioned earlier, but I think this is a bit more relevant to social media specifically when thinking about science communication, rather than just thinking about it on any other kind of platform that you might be using. So visuals are very important when it comes to social media, using kind of nice imagery, graphs and infographics and pictures, videos. It just draws the eye in, it makes people read more, and it also performs better. So when thinking about a platform like Twitter, which can be text only, but you also can include visuals. If you include a video on a tweet, it's about 30% more likely to perform better. It's important to keep things short. Luckily, quite a lot of platforms do force you into that. But I think people do use social media to receive news, but they're not necessarily looking for long form communications. So it's useful to keep it short. Keep things easy to understand, but don't dumb it down. I think don't underestimate your audience is what I mean by that. They don't want to be put off because they think that you're making it perhaps simpler for their benefit. And obviously it's important to keep things factual. And finally, to include a call to action. So a call to action is to basically end anything you're sharing with what you want people to do with that information. You're asking the audience to engage with you. So do you want them to read more? Do you want them to follow you, click through a link, fill in a survey, making sure that you're asking them to actually do something with that information at the end of it all. So to give a quick example, this was a recent publication released by a couple of our scientists in the Institute. So Josh Powell and Sarah Durant published this paper where they recorded climbing behavior in Asian badgers, and it was the first instance of this behavior being exhibited, and obviously very important and exciting work because it means that we know more about a very elusive species and we can help conserve them. But it's unlikely that a lot of people are going to go and find this long publication and read it all and take it all in and understand it and do something with that information. So we share this on ZSL Science. We put out a few tweets about it, and in that picture you can just about make out the badger climbing at the tree at the very top. So sharing those lovely visuals. That was a video, which I should have included as a video rather than an image on here, but the badger is climbing up the tree, and that's some lovely camera trap footage from that publication. And then a little bit more information in a bit more depth about what they're involved, what it means, and then right at the end, reading a link to read the full paper. On our science Twitter, we have a fairly science engaged audience, so they are the kind of audience that would go and read the paper if they knew about it. So a couple of other examples here. These are just a couple of our recent TikToks that we share. So if you're on TikTok, please do give ZSL London Zoo, Whipsnade Zoo, and Zoological Society of London a follow. So it's another channel that we use to share our science work. So that might be our scientists going out into the field, as this one on the left shows, looking at the Hainan peacock pheasant and how we conserve it, working with local communities and organizations in Hainan in China. And this lovely one on the right hand side is some camera trap footage from our Hogwatch project, capturing a lovely moment between a fox and her cubs. And we can use these lovely visuals to share more information about the work, and lead people to understand more about the science that we do. So I thought I'd put a quick bit in here about building an online presence, because it is a question that I get asked fairly frequently. So just a few tips to think about if you're interested in creating a presence on social media. Follow everything, follow people, follow organizations, hashtags and lists. Really curate the people that you follow, and make it what you want to engage with, and what you engage with, people will then engage back with you. Which leads to the second point, interaction and engagement is key. So making sure that you're responding if anybody is engaging with you as well, and keeping that consistency up, I think, is very important. Build your reputation. So that means kind of sharing facts, and making sure that it is factual and trustworthy, and sharing what you're doing. People are very interested in kind of day-to-day life and different areas that they might not see themselves in. So sharing those kind of facts and images and interesting things about your work is important. Support inclusivity and celebrate diversity. This is something that we really try to do across all of our channels at ZSL. So kind of sharing your own experiences, your lived experiences and insights, and showing your support for different groups as well. Diversity is your profile doesn't need to be one specific thing. The diversity is what makes it really good. You can try and reach outside of your echo chamber, keep things accessible, try not to include too much jargon or keeping things behind a paywall. And I think trying to fit it into your workload. The great thing about social media is that it's portable and it's personal. It doesn't have to be a burden, and you can do it. It's in your pocket most of the time. So you can do it whenever suits you. I thought I'd put this quick slide in about other areas of our work. But the main thing of my work, the main thing about this is that what we do is take the scientific research that we do in the Institute and turn it into content. So whether that content is social media, as I've been talking about, or whether it is the YouTube channel or our science and conservation events, academic events for external audiences or internal people, internal staff and students within the Institute as well, is a big part of what we do. The top right picture is just me, penguin, just to show that that is also a great part of my job, is being here in the zoo. So a quick plug for all ZSL channels. If you don't already, please follow us at ZSL Science on Twitter. We are obviously also on TikTok, as I mentioned. We have the ZSL Wild Science podcast, which there is a brilliant back catalogue of episodes that I would really encourage you to listen to, which shares incredible research. ZSL and partners and collaborators featured on lots of those previous episodes, and hopefully we will have some more to share with you very soon. And if you haven't, please do sign up to receive details of future science and conservation events, the next one of which is on the 23rd of April, which hopefully you will all have already received information about. If you're interested in science communication, a few things that I would recommend you signing up to find more information. The PSciCom mailing list is a really great one. This is a mailing list where people can share a huge amount of information. So whether that be events or internships or opportunities, job opportunities as well, you can kind of sign up and it just comes straight to you. So you can Google PSciCom mailing list and that will come up and you can sign up to that. This bottom left is just an article that I think is quite useful for top tips for scientists using social media. It's specific to scientists, but I do think it's still a lot of the information that's in there is relevant to other areas of work also. And as I mentioned, our next event is coming up on the 23rd of April. It's free to attend and it's at London Zoo, so please do come along if you're able to. And that leads me to the end. So thank you so much for listening. And if anybody has any questions, I am happy to take those.
Thank you so much for that, Harriet. I think it's really important in the world that we're in today to be able to communicate across all formats, and especially with the growing trend of social media. And as you said, it's not going away. It's something that is growing day by day, and it's about how do we really harness the power of that and be able to share factual information in a way that is engaging and at different levels depending on your audience. One of the questions that I had is, how much would you recommend TikTok for science, which is quite interesting because we've kind of just gone live with that really in the last couple of months.
That's a great question. Yeah, I would really recommend it. I think there is a huge and growing audience on TikTok, and a huge and growing kind of range of people that are sharing information there. I think it's I think it has a bit of a stigma perhaps about the audience that is on TikTok, but I think it's also really useful for kind of professional communications as well, which I think people often don't consider. We, as I kind of showed, we share quite engaging and fun videos on there, but it's kind of just as a hook to draw people in, to tell people more about the information. So it's again finding that audience and kind of thinking about what they might find interesting to kind of take more from. So if they find a lovely video of a fox and her cubs really interesting and engaging, they're more likely to read the caption, which might tell them more about the science behind it. So yeah, I would really recommend it. I think there's a lot of research organizations that are on there now. Universities are on there, and it is just getting bigger and bigger. So I think it's only going to grow.
It definitely is a skill set. Being able to communicate science in a 30-second to 40-second chunk is a skill. So if you have any ideas or suggestions, we would be very keen to take some.
Yeah. I mean, a huge part of what I do is kind of looking at the publications that come out of the Institute, and condensing those into something that I think is accessible and digestible for our audiences. So as I showed with the publication about the climbing badger and the tweets, it's really trying to find the key message, and sharing that with what I think the audience wants. And that audience varies. So the audience that we have on Twitter is slightly different to the audience that we have for our science and conservation events. So really tailoring that content to what we think people will want from that. But yeah, I think trying to find the key message is the most important thing. What are they actually trying to say at the end of the day?
Luckily, Josh and Rosie are both incredible. Professor Rosie Woodruff and Joshua Powell are fantastic orators. Some of you may remember that Josh actually did a talk for us a couple of years ago on his work before it even got released. So you guys were in the know before it went to publication. So they're great orators, and they can really sort of enhance their work, but sometimes it is quite bland when it's black and white on a piece of paper. Talking of Twitter, obviously there's a little bit of controversy around Twitter over the last couple of years. Do you think that there are sort of a leading merging social media channel, or is it mainly TikTok is the big one at the moment for sort of sci-coms?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I was having this conversation with someone earlier today, actually, about how Twitter has changed and whether and the kind of audience that is still on Twitter. And we talked about it quite a lot. And I think the conclusion that we came to was that when Twitter was taken over by Elon Musk, a lot of people left. And when it turned to X, a lot of people left. We keep saying Twitter, but X. A lot of people moved to other platforms. But I have noticed recently that a lot of people are kind of looking at the community that ZSL Science have on Twitter. A lot of people have returned, which is interesting because I think that the equivalents to Twitter, so things like Blue Sky and Mastodon and Threads, there wasn't just one equivalent that everybody shifted to. People split, and I think in those other channels, people perhaps found that there wasn't the same community that had been built on Twitter over such a long period of time. So I think people perhaps are slightly coming back to Twitter now, and maybe they're not sharing as much, but people definitely are still engaging with it. So for us, I think it's definitely still a really valuable platform. But I think that also brings up a really good point of kind of keeping your ear to the ground about what is changing and what is coming up as new platforms. Obviously, TikTok is a fairly new one for ZSL, but I think it was around for a little bit of time, and then we were like, okay, this is not going to go anywhere, and this is a really valuable audience for us to engage with, and just kind of get our messaging out to a wider audience is never a bad thing. So I think anything with social media, there is always going to be a level of controversy in some way, and they can change, and we just kind of have to keep being flexible and adaptable to those changes, and making sure that at the end of the day we're getting our message out to an audience.
And I think it's definitely being seen, because the content you guys create on TikTok in particular is really good, and it's very high quality on there. So if anyone is on here that hasn't, followed, now is your opportunity to make sure that you've done it tonight.
Definitely, and big props to the kind of digital content team as well, because they do a lot of that work.
Yes, it's really incredible. I think they've been putting up pygmy hippo washes this week. I know.
So
Very
nice.
cute. That is the end. Now, Lucy, you're off the hook. You can take a breath. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Sarah, Harriet and Lucy for taking the questions this evening and for their wonderful talks. A huge thank you to also our fellows who have joined us this evening and for putting forward your questions. I hope you have taken away some ideas, some tips, tricks, or learned something new this evening. I had never heard of Science Capital, so that's something new that I'm taking away. I also didn't know the skill that I had to do about collecting rhino semen. That's something else I've learned this evening, that is a skill that I never had to do. So thank you so much for the three of you for coming and speaking to us. There's lots of events coming up for fellows, so I do hope that you will be joining us at the fellowship conference on the 20th of April. If you haven't done so, please RSVP to fellowship@zsl.org. It's going to be a really fantastic day with lots of different elements that I think you can really engage with. We also have our Fantastic Women and Where to Find Them event on Thursday, the 16th of May, which is really important. It's a female fellows networking event that I'm looking forward to sharing with you in the next couple of weeks. Additionally, we're always passionate about hearing from you, our fellows, anything that you're interested about hearing on or feedback. In the meantime, once again, thank you to our wonderful speakers and to you, our fellows, for attending. I look forward to seeing you on the 20th.
Before
Bye.
everyone goes, just a massive thank you to Lindsay, who puts so much time and effort into all of these events. I know she cares a lot about the experiences and events for fellows. So just a huge amount of work goes on behind the scenes. So a massive well done also to Lindsay. And
thanks, guys. That's all round.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.
Just me? Oh, it's just me.